Next, a portion of Book TV's monthly 3-hour live program, In Depth.
Over here, and then you come into my office and see these are some of the books. You know, I got a lot more. I don't know, I got thousands and thousands of books, and most of them are at home or at other offices and so on.
How many do you think you own?
Oh man, a few thousand. You know, maybe, I don't know, 5,000 to 7,000 right now. I think my wife thinks that's a modest number. I think she thinks I have like 10,000 books. I may, but I won't tell her. I got a research fund, man. I got to get it better. This book right here was so important to me. This book, Great Negroes Past and Present, by Russell L. Adams. In the 5th grade, Mrs. James, my teacher, and I love Mrs. James. I don't know where Mrs. James is. She was a teacher at Wingard Elementary School. You know, I don't know her first name. You know how it is when you're a kid. You don't know your teacher's first name. It's just Mrs. James. They're omnipotent, right? Does God have a first name? Mr. God, right? So Ms. James. And Mrs. James was extremely important because she taught us all about black history. Jan Matzellick and the Shoelasting Machine, Deadwood Dick, the Great Cowboy, Little Brown Baby with Sparkling Eyes by Paul Laurence Dunbar. I run my first blue ribbon reciting poetry in the class of Mrs. James in summer, because summer school was very important. But this book introduced us to great black people in history. And it was an amazing Estevanico, Arizona's African discoverer, right? Crispus Attucks, first to die for independence. Benjamin Banneker, mathematical wizard and inventor. This was a survey of black genius and creativity that made us believe that we could do the same thing. She wanted us absolutely to understand that the people in this book were people like us. This book was important. Marshall Frady, the late Marshall Frady, a very, very peculiarly gifted American writer, but about a subject that I cover in my new book on Martin Luther King Jr., the most gifted apostle of Martin Luther King Jr., of course, Jesse Jackson. And this book is a great book because it captures a great American. Jesse Jackson is an Emersonian figure, the constant self-recreation, the perennial quest for the means to articulate an American ideal that is nurtured in his bosom privately that he wants to share with the world publicly. I mean, Jesse Jackson is an American original. You know, I argue in my book that he makes love in language, that the cadences, the undulating rhythms that twist and turn are very sensual where flesh and spirit meet. And you take measure of Jesse Jackson here in the fullest biography of him. And Marshall Frady, the late Marshall Frady, was a great writer. Race Rebels here by Robin Kelley. Robin Kelley, in my mind, is one of the greatest scholars ever produced in the African American experience. In my generation of scholars, nobody is more talented and more gifted than Robin Kelley. He's a genius of extraordinary gifts, and among them are an inexhaustible work ethic that allows him to dig deep into the archives of not only black history, though that's important, but of working class history. You know, people celebrate doing history from the bottom up. Mentors of his like the ingenious and brilliant Nell Painter, who was featured, of course, on In Depth recently. But Robin Kelley is renowned in this generation. You know, the broader world might not know him walking down the street, but for those of us within the academy and those of us who take the life of the mind seriously and those of us who pursue scholarship, both as a career and a vocation, most especially, revere this young man because he's done just extraordinary work. The creativity, the lucidity, the poetry of his expression. Dig that, brother. Much love to you, Robin Kelley. You know, read all of his works. He's a smart, smart guy. I'm like a kid at Christmas when I get new books. I remember when I first saw this book by Steve Hahn, A Nation Under Our Feet. This is another brilliant historian. I had the chance to be his colleague at University of Pennsylvania. This book won all kinds of awards. I think the Bancroft Award, maybe it was nominated for the Pulitzer, or did it win? I think, yes. But another brilliant, brilliant historian and a very able scholar. Because historians, you know, take a lot longer than us cultural critics to get their work done because they're digging in a different vineyard, so to speak. They're working with a different pace, with a different set of texts and ideas that nourished the work of those of us who are doing culture criticism if we do our work right. So, you know, when I see a book like this, you know, I devour it, I read it, and then I say, I'm going to use that in the future for something else. I don't always read with a kind of Benthamite utilitarian calculus, or I'm reading this book for this particular purpose. Though very few of us read without having the purpose of conversation with others to be able to engage them. This is a great book by Nick Salvatore. Singing in a Strange Land, C.L. Franklin, the Black Church, and the Transformation of America. This is one of the great preachers in the history of American rhetoric. Aretha's daddy, Aretha Franklin, perhaps, arguably, the greatest sound to emerge out of a voice, a human vocal cords, right, reverberating, vibrating, maybe the greatest sound made, arguably. Some would say maybe Sarah Vaughan, some would say others. Sam Cooke, maybe Sam Cooke and Aretha Franklin. But Aretha Franklin, her genius was nurtured by her father, Reverend C.L. Franklin. I used to listen to this man every Sunday night in Detroit, Michigan. C.L. Franklin, if you don't die before you get a chance to hear this man preach, you don't have me. The sung sermon in the African American tradition, the hoop as we call it. One of the greatest preachers ever. The eagle stirreth her nest. He ordained Jesse Jackson. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr. In Detroit before the March on Washington, and where King delivered arguably an even a more impressive version of his I Have a Dream speech right in Detroit. You know I'm from Detroit, West Side. Got to show love to the hometown, the crib. What's up, D? You know, Skip Gates's book was here right next to Nelson George. Where Did Our Love Go? Nelson George is perhaps the most gifted African-American man of letters of our time. I mean, what can't this guy do? He's a novelist. He writes great novels. He writes superb cultural criticism about hip-hop, about basketball, This History of Motown, one of the earliest books to really take a critical look at Motown and an appreciative look as well. He's a movie director, a film Marvin, so to speak, a film director, producer. The guy is amazing. I think he's one of the most remarkable men of letters of our generation, maybe the most distinguished because he's mastered so many different genres. Down here, Homi Bhabha's book, The Location of Culture, you know, dense theoretical explications of post-colonialism, which is very, very important. And he's a very, very sharp guy. Here's a guy that was on In Depth recently, John McWhorter. Oops. Oh, I'm sorry. I read everything that McWhorter writes. I disagree with a lot of what he says, but he's a very sharp guy.
How many books do you read a year?
A bunch, man. You gotta keep reading. You can't stop reading. Here's another. This is a great book. This is Craig Werner. Higher Ground, Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, Curtis Mayfield, and the Rise and Fall of American Soul. Now, I said the greatest sound of a human voice, arguably Aretha Franklin and Sam Cooke. The greatest artist, I would argue, is Stevie Wonder. I mean, you know, the genius of Stevie Wonder, the lyrical dexterity, the melodic nimbleness, the rhetorical command of you know, the ideas that were being represented. He was a politician and an intellectual at the same time in his music. This book right here, The Undeserving Poor, From the War on Poverty to the War on Welfare. Michael Katz, another great historian at the University of Pennsylvania. And this man has done yeoman's work in trying to beat back the mythology of the deserving poor. His work has brilliantly engaged those people who would dismiss poor people as so many welfare queens and pathological people who don't deserve the kind of support that those of us who believe society should offer should give to them.